I'd like to go ahead and get started again. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who graciously agreed to move from a track session with an expected audience of half to a third the size of this group to this large audience. And we really appreciate her flexibility in doing that. We are pleased to have with us again this year Dr. Barbara Lawton. Dr. Lawton has worked closely with Dr. Deming over the last 5 years on the development of a system of profound knowledge. She is currently a consultant helping the leaders of government and industry to understand and internalize Dr. Deming's philosophy and to reshape the fabric of their organizations accordingly. Dr. Lawton is a member of the Program Advisory Board of the Deming Scholars MBA program. She has worked as an internal quality consultant to senior management for several Fortune 500 companies. She most recently was the Director of Total Quality Assurance with Albany International, where she worked with the President on the application of the system of profound knowledge. Overall, she has 17 years of consulting experience in business, academia, and government, both in the U.S. and abroad. Today, Dr. Lawton will discuss moving beyond intellectual understanding to both personal and organizational change and the role and responsibilities of the leader in creating, directing, and supporting the change. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lawton today to discuss leading the transformation process.
Does that mic work? Yes, I can hear it. It's a pleasure to address this group again. This is certainly, I think, the best group and the toughest group. When I talk to people in academia, I figure piece of cake, they are all, their heads are in the clouds and so on. But you are the folks that have to actually do this stuff, right? And to me, you are the toughest audience. You're the toughest critics. And so what I hope to share with you today is something that I hope will be useful to you. About 8 years ago, I started in the quality field. And to me, Dr. Deming's ideas have come fairly naturally. There's a year in there that I can remember struggling through some of his system of profound knowledge, theory of knowledge, that type of thing. But in the end, it was actually natural to me. So no big deal there. And when I went into an organization and started working with an organization for the first time, said, well, let's sit down and look at this. And isn't this easy? And that now that you know it, well, go and do it. And to me, that was my idea of change. I'd come through the same old academic system as anybody else and had thought of the intellectual acceptance of his ideas as what transformation was all about. And lo and behold, as I'm sure you have all recognized, is that that is only at best the beginning of what transformation is about. So my own personal area of interest for the last 8 years, and also that of my co-author, Dr. Nida Bakaitis, is really how do you go about making transformation? What is transformation? How do you go about doing that? And that's what I'd like to share with you today, is my understanding of that process and how it's developing. Nida and I, what we're trying to do is put together, in a sense, a theory. It's an evolving theory about this. The idea being, as Dr. Deming would say, that a theory has to, or knowledge has to both explain the past and enable us to predict the future. And so in that regard, we're finding that the model that I'm going to be showing you today is useful on both those counts. And the test will be with you to see if it's useful for you. Just sort of an outline for where we'll go. Starting out, what is the nature of the change? What is transformation about? Again, I thought at one point in time it was purely an intellectual process. You learn it just like you do any other subject in school, and isn't that transformation? Well, it's actually quite a complex change. And then if you look at this change, what are the dimensions of successful transformation that you have to look at and work on? Some components for success, and then again, an evolving path for success, because I don't think by any means this is the answer, but just steps along the way. If you look at the history of progress, putting time on this horizontal axis and progress on the vertical axis, and I'm going to say human progress here, which is health, wealth, and so on. If you look at the history of progress, it's a discontinuous one. You might start out here with, let me just pick a point in time, and we'll start out, we'll have progress, and after a while it starts to level off and seems to stagnate. You seem to get to a point where you can't seem to go any further. In the United States, there seems to be that feeling now that no matter how much money we might put into the systems that we have, and how much energy and time and how many times we reorganize, there's this feeling somewhat of stagnation. We can't seem to break through and get progress going again. Well, this is a common pattern. Thomas Kuhn started to talk about it in his book, The Nature of Scientific Revolution, and people like Joel Barker have popularized it. But if you again look at this, what you would have as an example, let me take here craftsmanship. The point in time when all we had were individual craftsmen going back 200 years ago. You wanted a buggy, you wanted a house, you wanted furniture, anything like that. They had to each be made individually by a craftsman. One person would make that buggy from start to finish. Might take 2-3 months, okay, but that's how you got something made. If craftsman was the only way we can begin to do things, there's a limit to how much progress you can actually make inside a society. Right? How many people can be craftsmen? How many people can be engaged in this work? And back in the late 1800s then, we had a new idea come along, and that new idea was really the start of the Industrial Revolution. What you have here is the idea that you could take the work of building a buggy, for example, and break it into individual components. Okay? You standardize the pieces and parts, and you break the job down so that anyone with a little bit of training can do those individual jobs, such like making a car. You can then take a car and break it into, this man just tightens bolts all day long. Doesn't take much education, doesn't take much training. And you engineer the work so it's in individual components. You have then the Industrial Revolution, which is really a whole change in thinking from what we had here. And at this point in time, as you change the thinking, you begin another curve upward, and finally that too begins to level off. So this curve is then the Industrial Revolution. There comes a point in time, though, where this is no longer creating value for society again, no longer helping us move forward. We've taken this idea as far as we can. We've applied it in business, we've applied it in education, we've applied it in healthcare, right? And we've come to this point, though, that the idea of breaking jobs down and standardizing and so on isn't going to help us move forward any further in terms of progress. And what I think we have here is another shift in thinking that will take us on another curve. This shift in thinking, to me, is what total quality, I forget what audience I'm talking to. This is, Dr. Deming's work would take us through. And forgive my slip there, but I look at total quality and people have to, it means different things to all different people. So it's a generic that I can usually use in talking to those who can't take Deming. All right. But the idea, it's a movement. There are those that are out there that can't take Deming. I see Dr. Deming's ideas, as a matter of fact, as the leading edge of a paradigm shift. Right? What we have going on in these different breaks here is there's a break in thinking, a change in thinking. We begin to see things in a whole different way. System of profound knowledge is a break in thinking. It's a whole different frame of reference, just as when we moved from craftsmen to the Industrial Revolution and so on. And when you have that break in thinking, then there is a period where you use those ideas, you utilize them, take them to advantage, develop systems and methods to take those ideas to advantage. This is true in terms of science, and it's true in terms of even social movements. Think about the time where we believed that one person could own another, okay? And how much progress could society make along that paradigm? Well, certainly there was probably some progress. So even with slavery, people were fed and taken care of and so on. There was some progress. And then you have a paradigm shift. No person can own another, right? And you have a change then in the way society operates. And then another paradigm shift. All men are created equal or with equal rights. And then you have then changes in systems along the way, such as from separate but equal, okay, to actually full integration. So this history of progress works whether you're talking about scientific or social or economic ideas. You have periods of continual growth in here where you're refining and developing methods to exploit an idea. And then finally, the point where the idea becomes limiting. And as Dr. Deming has said about the United States, is that we've reached the limit of capability of our current systems. What is needed is a whole new way of thinking. And that's where we are today. So this is a backdrop that, and what I'm setting the stage for here is that system of profound knowledge and Dr. Deming's ideas are really a paradigm, a shift in paradigm in a way of thinking. And in terms of paradigms, I'd say a paradigm is a frame of reference or a perspective that you use when you look at the world. And what they do for you is that they define the boundaries and the rules for success in your day-to-day operations. Okay? Let me give an example, this real personal example. And this one sticks in my mind a lot. I was raised in New York City, in the Bronx. And my parents are first-generation Americans. I grew up very much inside my extended family, with my mother being the primary caregiver person shaping my beliefs and values. My father worked 2 jobs, so I only saw him on weekends sort of thing. And even then it was, don't disturb your father, let him sleep and rest. And so up until about age 9 or 10, there was one set of rules for living inside my family and dealing with my family. It's, well, you share things, okay, and you're nice to people, and that type of very caring, nurturing type of environment. And then when you get to a point where you're spending more of your time outside of your family and outside of your extended family, and you start dealing with kids in school, then the paradigm was shifted on me 180 degrees. My father is telling me, but the real world isn't that way. Okay, the rules for success in the real world are, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, get them before they get you. You know, and I can remember just this reaction on my part. Now, I don't know if you have that type of experience or can relate it, but it's a shift. It's like having the rug pulled out from underneath you. It's a whole different frame of reference, and what it does is define boundaries that you work in and what's the rules for success within it. Okay? So we all have paradigms and we all operate by them, whether it's on a personal level or an organizational level. What Dr. Deming is giving us is a new paradigm. The system of profound knowledge being this leading edge, I would say, of a paradigm for the 21st century, like 1980s, 1990s, and beyond. The aim of this paradigm, Dr. Deming says, to provide jobs and more jobs. In my mind, I look at it as, I don't think we're going to find this slide in there, so don't bother to turn. Those have to be submitted like 2 months ahead of time. Well, a lot changes in between. The aim here, provide jobs and more jobs. This is how I would begin to translate it and help people understand this, is that if we really want to continue to provide jobs and more jobs, what we have to do is continually create value for customers, ourselves, and the society that nurtures us all. And then secondly, continuously improve our ability to create value. Okay? That, to me, is what the aim of Dr. Deming's paradigm is to help you learn, continually create value. I'm not saying quality, because too many times people take quality and they completely separate it from cost. No relationship to cost whatsoever. But yet value is both combination of quality, convenience, cost, all of those things. Okay? So this is what I see as the aim of his paradigm. And this paradigm shift, again, this is treading on thin ice perhaps here, but I see it as the leading edge again of a shift in the United States that's moving the U.S. from the left-hand side of this slide, where we believe strongly in competition. You know, what we have to do to improve our school system is make sure that teachers are competing for grades just like our students are. Right? We just need more competition out there, and that will do it. Deregulate, that will do it. That'll improve. Right? That was the rules for success. That's the old paradigm. Consumption, focusing on a very consumption-oriented society, high emphasis on efficiency and self-assertion. Just go out there and self-assertion, where I would say now what we're moving to is not just the left-hand side, and not from swinging the pendulum from one end all the way out to the other, where you were just saying cooperation is the only answer. I'd say there's more of a balance in here. You need to balance the two. And so that's how I begin to see this leading edge, or what the new paradigm is about. Okay, what does this have to do with transformation in organizations? When I look at an organization, if you see this organization inside of its environment, if I walk into your company today, whether it be a business or a healthcare organization or school, what I see are the behaviors that are exhibited, the methods that you're using, your practices, your equipment, how your office is laid out, and so on. So what you would have here is, if you're looking for a company that has transformed itself, people take these study missions, go over to Japan, and what do they see? They see quality circles, they see SPC, statistical process control. Okay, some will say, well, this is self-directed work teams, there's a process improvement teams. You keep on listing it down, just keep on listing it. Okay? And this is what they think transformation is about. This is what you can see in the organization. And so what they tend to do, very often, is they try to use similar methods within their own organization. Right? Just go and make these changes at this level. But if you look at where does the behavior, methods, and practices inside an organization really come from, I look at it then as just the tip of an iceberg. Okay? So let this iceberg represent your organization. And it is functioning in this economic, social, and political environment. Okay? If you take two organizations that are different in terms of their behaviors, methods, and practices, if I saw them and they were behaving differently, I'd say that the reason that they're behaving differently has to do with the systems that are driving that work. Right? And so if you have one organization that is learning and improving and people have joy in work and so on, versus a typical organization, I can probably trace it right back to their systems that they have supporting that. People systems being, what are their hiring practices like? What are their people development processes like? Training, education, and so on. How do they select people? Those sorts of things. So this is your people development processes. Your work processes, how do you divide your labor, how do you get the tasks of the organization done, and finally your managerial systems, which would be how do you do your planning, right? How do you do your budgeting? How do you do your communication? What information do you collect? How do you use it? Do you use it to judge, rate, and rank? Do you use it to set goals? Okay. And so this systems piece is what is driving this tip of the iceberg. And if you go even one level deeper than that, Stephen Covey uses the expression, if you want to change the systems, you have to change the systems programmers. Well, the systems programmers, the way we think, what's our frame of reference? What's our boundaries that we're using inside of our mind? Tom Nolan talked a lot about boundaries this morning, right? And what's the boundaries of our thinking and the rules for success that we carry around inside our heads. If you want to change what's up here in the behavior, methods, and practices level, you need to go down to the systems level, and even deeper than that, you need to go to the paradigm level in the organization. What do people think? Okay. One other thing I want to say about paradigms, and just set this out as a ground rule, is I would say that paradigms are not right or wrong. I look at paradigms as a tool. A paradigm, in a sense, is not reality. What it is actually a map of reality. Okay? It's how you perceive reality. It's not reality, it's how you perceive reality. It's a tool. Helps you decide what's going to be useful and what's not useful for your organization. Okay. So in this context, I'm going to say, like any tool, they're not good or bad. The question is whether or not they're useful. So if I'm trying to drive from here to California, there's many different maps I could use. There's railway maps, there's air photo maps, there's geological survey maps, there's land property ownership maps. There's thousands of maps out there. They're not wrong, they're just not useful if I'm trying to drive from here to California. Right? So I'm going to say these maps are not right or wrong. The question is, are they useful? Do they help your company provide jobs and more jobs? Do they help your company create value? So are they an accurate representation of the environment today and the rules for success? I think that's a really important point, because when we start addressing people on the paradigm level, as soon as you start saying, you're wrong and I'm right, you have tremendous defensiveness. And in a sense, Tom had talked about what's the usefulness of numbers as well, when you can get it out of that personal realm. And so when we look at beliefs, we don't want to say is, you're wrong, I'm right, but rather, are they still useful? Are these assumptions still true? Okay, this is a pretty theoretical discussion here, but I'll give you an example in just a second. So some definitions. I said paradigms we each individually and personally hold. Organizational culture, I'm going to say, is a system of shared assumptions. Inside your organization, you have individuals who have different backgrounds, they all have different belief systems, they have different paradigms, and so on. But what you have as an organization is some common rules for working inside that organization as to what it means to be successful. So this is a system of shared assumptions, and it comes as a result of shared experience. We work together and we decide what helps us in this business and what doesn't. The organization I'm going to then define as not just the work and practices, but the set of assumptions under which the organization operates, as well as the systems, work, and practices built upon those assumptions. So it's that entire iceberg. Okay? And that's what the job's going to be, is transformation. A quick example of how paradigms affect business. In 1970, General Motors was perhaps the most successful organization that had ever existed on the face of the earth, outside maybe the Catholic Church. Okay? Right? Yeah. Think about organizations that survive. General Motors, perhaps the most successful organization. And in 1970, a number of the senior managers said, my goodness, look what we have created. What we need to do is sit down and actually discuss what it is we've done and that has made us so successful, so that we can capture it and make sure that we do more of it. So they did. In 1970, they wrote down these 10 things. They said, number one, this is what we believe. They wrote it in a paradigm context. Okay, the rules, the boundaries and rules for success. General Motors is in the business of making money, not cars. Okay? Success comes not from technological leadership, but from having the resources to quickly adopt innovations successfully introduced by others. This is their belief system, paradigms. Cars are primarily status symbols. Styling is therefore more important than quality to buyers who are, after all, going to trade up every other year. Okay? The U.S. car market is isolated from the rest of the world. Foreign competitors will never gain more than 15% of the domestic market. Energy will always be cheap and abundant. Okay? Keeps on going. Workers do not have an important impact on productivity or product quality. Okay? The consumer movement does not represent the consensus of a significant portion of the U.S. population. Okay? The government is the enemy. It must be fought tooth and nail every inch of the way. You probably see them saying the same thing about unions. Strict centralized financial controls are the secret to good administration. Okay, and lastly, managers should be developed from the inside. What they did is they put down what they believed their formula for success was, to make sure that they would continue to do more of it, okay, ever since. And they have, right? But what you do is that you have paradigms at the bottom of the iceberg, and what systems do is they codify it. Okay, they codify those beliefs. So when you look at General Motors as an organization, this is actually Frederick Taylor, okay, drew this, 100 years ago or so? More than that? This picture of an organization, doesn't this picture, though, exactly typify the beliefs, codify many of the beliefs that General Motors has? It's certainly, what's the aim here? Certainly an aim of this type of organization is a strict, centralized control. Okay? Certainly, it also codifies the belief that people cannot affect productivity or quality, keep them in these little boxes and pieces. It's a very control-oriented and efficiency-oriented organization. Okay? So this is not an organization. It's a map or a picture of an organization. This is not General Motors or any other company, but it's a picture. It reflects how we see it and how we therefore manage it. Okay? If we look at Dr. Deming, what he's proposing here, he is proposing a radical paradigm shift. He's saying you view your organization this way, as a system. Okay? Here is the customer. The aim is to create value. Okay? And continually improve our ability to do so. So what you have the focus on in this organization is understanding the customer's needs, understanding the customer's process, so that actually you can begin to anticipate future needs, and therefore continually increase the value you are providing to them. So you have going into consumer research, design and redesign, and all the way through. So it's a way to conceptualize the organization. And then you develop systems to support this, to codify it, and you'll develop methods and practices. So what you have is in this organization a real tight linking between what the organization believes as the rules for success in the environment, the systems that you develop, and then the behaviors, methods, and practices that evolve. Make sense so far? Let me see some heads, either yay or nay. Okay, good. So then what's the challenge here of transformation? I would say that when Dr. Deming talks about transforming the organization, it's a really tough task that he's talking about here. He's talking about changing the organizational paradigms, the whole organization's paradigms, its belief systems, about what it means to be successful. Then aligning the organizational systems to support that. And this is the work systems. How do you divide the labor? Who does what? How do you organize it? What are your people systems for hiring, selecting, training, developing people? And your managerial systems for planning, for control. Okay? What's the information system like? Or is it all financial? Or is it information that enables you, that is going to help your organization create value, continuously learn, and continuously improve? What's the decision-making processes like? Okay. So there's all of that. And then developing new practices and methods. You have a system, but then within that, every department, every group of people has their own systems and their own methods and practices that are going on. This is what transformation's about. This is like, I'd say, renovating a house while living in it. Okay? It's a tough job. Very different than starting building a new house. I'd much rather build a new house any day than renovate an old house. That's a heck of a lot of work. Though we don't have the luxury of being able to do that. We can't say IBM, Xerox, General Motors, sorry. Okay? You know, you're the dinosaurs, we let you go. You go to extinction and we need to develop new organizations. We can't afford that. What we want to do here is renovate while we're doing it. To renovate a house, though, you would have to have a tremendous amount of knowledge in there, actually, about if this family is supposed to live in this house and provide shelter, food, cook your meals, live there, and so on. I can't just shut off the electricity and start saying, well, I'm going to do the rewiring this week. Right? Right? What does that do to the ability to heat and cook food and bathe and live there comfortably and do all those activities? You have to understand the pieces and parts of the organization, because when you start shutting a piece off, whether it be changing the reward system, you have to say, what does that do to influence the whole operation of that organization? Okay, so the transformation, if we look at then how do we actually go about successful transformation, I'd say there's a couple different dimensions that we'd begin with. One of the dimensions here, Dr. Deming says this, starts out with this: transformation begins with the individual. Okay. You also have Stephen Covey, who says a similar sort of thing. If you want to change the system, you must first change the system's programmers. So one of the dimensions when you start talking about changing an organization is, I would say, a personal or individual dimension. And in that individual dimension, what we're moving from is this position here where we are now. I am my position. And what you need to do is move people from this point to where they are willing and equipped to learn, grow, and change. I haven't said adopt Dr. Deming's philosophy, because I see Dr. Deming's philosophy as a paradigm shift for our time. It's not the last paradigm shift. There's going to be more, continuing on from there. And who knows when the next one will come. But what we have to do is develop people who are willing to learn and equipped to learn. When you look at this I am my position, what we're trying to do here is two different things. We've got working against us the fact that people, in a sense, have stopped thinking. They work within their boundaries, as Tom was pointing out. So we need to work on the thinking level. But then the other part of this is there's a self-esteem level in here. If you think about where you get your resistance from inside of an organization, I get a lot of resistance on this personal or individual level. Because when you say, I am my position, there's a whole sense of my personal self-esteem and self-worth comes from that position that I hold. Right? So you often find the higher up the managerial ladder you go, the greater the resistance you have. For those people at the bottom, their sense of self-esteem and self-worth doesn't come from their position on the ladder, so they are more willing. Okay? And so when you're looking at how do you help people be both willing and equipped, this is part of the transformation process that we have to go through. You can't change the organization until you change the systems programmers, until you enable people to learn and think, to help them to learn and think. One of the people who talk about this is Stephen Covey. Now there's a whole bunch in here, but as I'm working with organizations, I'll keep Dr. Deming's work as the basic theory, and in my mind, the way I envision it is, if you've ever done this experiment in school, I don't know, I remember doing this like in kindergarten. What you do is you take a glass of water and you heat it up, and you dissolve as much sugar in it as you possibly can in this hot water, supersaturated solution of sugar in water. And what you do is you put a pencil across the top and a string that goes down into the glass of sugar water, maybe a pin at the bottom or something to hold it weighted. And as the solution cools, the sugar will crystallize on that string. And you get rock candy. It's how you make rock candy. So you make rock candy when you're in kindergarten or first grade. Well, I look at that in a sense, I look at Dr. Deming's theory, his system of profound knowledge, in a similar vein. I'd say that there is almost a supersaturated solution, or at least a saturated solution, of ideas that are out there. Because you see people all around in many different fields coming up with these ideas of cooperation, right? And ideas of working in a system. They're ideas of our time, and I see Dr. Deming's system of profound knowledge as being that string in the center that is the core that everything's beginning to crystallize around. He has the best framework with which to begin to put these ideas together. So I look at Covey as is one of those people out there in that solution, which has ideas that are useful in this regard. And this is his ideas here. You can begin to see the resemblance to Dr. Deming. He says that the maturity continuum, his focus is on the individual. You start out in a very dependent state. Your whole sense of self is dependent upon the reflection of people around you, back to you. You see yourself through other people. You don't have an identity and sense of self on your own. And so you're in this dependent state. And then as you move up, you be proactive. I think Deming uses slightly different words. But going out there and creating value, not reacting. Dr. Deming says management isn't reaction. It's predicting, it's planning, deciding for yourself where your future is. Begin with the end in mind, creating that idea of where you want to go, and then putting first things first. So moving to independence and then finally to interdependence. And these ideas are built on the same concept that you're all part of the same system, you're looking for a win-win, and so on. So here's one set of ideas that I think can help people begin to move up this dimension. But it's an important dimension. You can't ignore this dimension. Without it, you won't have change. You have Stephen Covey. You also have Daryl Conner. He wrote the book Managing at the Speed of Change. And these are all popular pieces. Now, you can go back into their research and get where the core of their ideas are coming from. But he also talks about, on that dimension, the other part of personal change that you're looking at is that when people move from, and you're not going to find this one either. Okay, sorry. I can hear the rustle of pages. The other part in moving up this dimension is that there's change involved here, very personal change. And there is the discomfort of change, or part of the discomfort of change, comes from the sense of losing control. He's saying that people need to feel in control of their lives. And you feel there's a sense of loss of control when your expectations about the future are disrupted. So you're expecting that you're going to get this promotion and this is the line or path, promotional change for you. Okay, or you're expecting that this is what your retirement's going to be like, or you're expecting these things. And when your expectations are disrupted by change, there's a sense, again, of feeling a loss of control. And he says there's two ways that people look for control. One is direct, the ability to dictate the outcome. And secondly, indirectly, just to at least be able to anticipate the outcomes. Okay? So when you're moving up that dimension, the individual dimension, you've got that personal change issue of how do you help people build self-esteem, separate themselves from their position so that they are ready to be and willing to change and grow and learn. And secondly then, how do you help with this discomfort of change? How do you involve them in activities so that they maintain some sense of control? And then he talks about also the characteristics of human resilience, which are actually very similar to a lot of Stephen Covey's ideas, which is some of the material that I think is helpful. The other dimension of transformation that we're looking at is then the organizational dimension. You can have people learning inside your organization. They're very internally centered, they have a good sense of self-esteem, a good sense of self, they're ready, they're willing to change. Great. But the organization is unable to capture and act on individual learning. And just because I used General Motors before, I'll just refer to it again here, is that I'm sure if you were to go to General Motors, you'd find thousands, tens of thousands of people who want to change, who are ready and willing, and who are moving up that personal or individual axis, and yet the organization is unable to capture their learning and utilize it to change their systems and their work and their practices. So there's this second dimension of it too. So if we look at the two dimensions that we have then, the individual and the organizational, we'd say the organization of today is down in this corner, today's organization, where the individual is I am, my position, and you have an organization unable to capture and act on individual learning. And what we're looking at up in this corner, and let me just give you another nice little buzzword, transcendent organization is one that I've heard recently, one that can transcend itself. And again, I'm not just saying an organization that has adopted system of profound knowledge, because that's not the end of the continuum. We're not there when we've adopted system of profound knowledge. We want to be able to keep on learning and going forward. So this is what the task is moving from this corner to this corner. And as we begin to look at the different paths for change or for transformation, you might recognize some of these. Unstable pathways for transformation. Here you have today's organization, and what the company will do is send individuals off to some workshop. So recognizing the first thing we need to do is begin to work with our people and help them feel good about themselves, learn to cooperate, work together, build teamwork, and they send them off to a workshop, or they send them off to some outdoor experience. You see those advertised all the time. Let them learn how to be interdependent and so on. And what happens, though, is that people have what you might call a workshop high. They feel great. They come back. They're pumped up. They start acting differently inside the organization. And then as they act differently, they become an organizational misfit. And in a sense, the organization sends out these antibodies, okay, against them. Right? And what you have is that one of two different things happen. Is that the individual then just, comes right back down here, and you develop a cynic, you develop someone who is bitter, and who isn't going to listen to management again. Right? Or what you have is the person just saying, hey, life's too short, and leaving the organization. Okay? So that this was, if you work on just the individual axis alone, you're not going to get there. And if anything, what you do is then you've created some additional resistance in your organization to future change. Another unstable pathway for transformation would be if you just work on the organizational systems and practices. This would be, whether it be SPC, putting in SPC, statistical process control, or beginning Hoshin planning, or doing a reorganization. And if you change the organization, but you haven't prepared people, okay, you haven't helped them to understand, you haven't helped them to maintain some sort of control during that change, you've disrupted all their expectations, and they are living with complete ambiguity. They have no sense of where things are going from here. What you then have is, and I see this happen a lot as well, you have a reorganization, and yet, funny how nothing changes. People, in a sense, reinvent the old system. And I see this, one of the organizations that I worked with, they had 3 different product lines that they were making inside the same facility. They went to 3 different customers. So what they decided is, well, what would be really smart is if we take our organization, which was developed by departments or functions, manufacturing, design, customer service, and so on, well, we're going to put them and make them more in tune with our customers. So we're going to break them up into 3 parallel organizations inside the same facility. You have one organization that has its own designers and customer service people and manufacturing equipment and production workers and so on. And so they're supposed to be this nice, tight-knit little group now, a system working together, okay, to serve the customer. You have the same thing then, all 3 in parallel. And for a year and a half, nothing much has really changed. They redrew the boundaries, but yet people being unprepared, not understanding, and personally very deeply threatened by this. Because now you've got the designers sitting in the same room. Oh, and they took away the hierarchy. So they had the designers sitting with the production workers together, and they're supposed to be working together as a system. It's like, sure. And so the whole same organization operates as the one before, drove it right back to here. Boundaries are different, no big deal. So if you're not working with your people, you get the exact same thing. All right, the many back roads, and I didn't want to say to failure, but the many back roads that might not get you there, okay, is we talked about one, including application of the 14 points without understanding the relationship between individuals, culture, processes, and systems can do the same thing for you, too. For example, I've seen organizations that have purely just changed the compensation system alone. Does it change anything? No. Okay. And probably builds antibodies inside the organization. So the workshop high we've talked about, reorganization, personal leadership. You're seeing this where you have a very charismatic leader who spends a lot of time working with individuals throughout the organization, helping them to understand, and he is providing human glue. He is the human pathways between all the functions and departments. But if you don't change the system, what eventually happens is when that leader leaves, the system reasserts itself. It goes back to where it was before. So you have personal leadership, you have re-engineering, can be along those same lines. If you just redesign the system without working with the individuals, then you have the same problem. And same thing, changes in compensation system alone. And so what we're looking at as an evolution of the Deming transformation is, now this is something like PDSA, continually moving up in this direction along this axis, moving in both dimensions at the same time. And so I'd see that you have to begin to move these two forward together. What's going on inside of these, along this axis? This is a first attempt. I'm learning to try to use Sengi's pictures to demonstrate relationships between things and some of the things that have to go on. And you'll see some of them in the packet that more detailed than the ones that I'm using here. But these are the things that are actually going on, I see, along that axis. And they are a combination of both subject matter knowledge and system of profound knowledge. The subject matter knowledge is about organizations and about individuals, and using then SOPK to go forward. What you're needing to do here is build external knowledge. And the external knowledge is what's your customer's process like? What are the trends? Where is it going to? What are your competitors' processes like? What's the industry like? What's the environment you're functioning in today? Right? And using that to actually, I want to say, surface and test your assumptions. So look at those General Motors examples, as a matter of fact. That was a list of assumptions about what the external environment was like. Foreign competition will never take more than 15% of the marketplace. Okay, those sorts of things. So here, building external knowledge, because this is what's going to determine whether or not you're correctly assessing what is value to your customer. Building internal knowledge of your organization. And building internal knowledge is also on the relationship between the systems. So again, if I'm going to renovate this house and still live in it at the same time, I really need to understand how the electricity, the water, the gas, everything else contribute and interact in terms of a living environment. And so you have the same thing here. I've got my management systems, my work systems, and I feel like these are mostly transparent to people. It's like a fish doesn't know it's in water. I feel like people go into organizations and they live inside their organizations and their systems are transparent. It's like water. They don't know they're in water and they don't know how those systems act to determine what goes on inside the organization. So you have this building of internal knowledge about your systems and about your people, and then changing your organization accordingly. And the same thing here, working with people to build competence, professional competence, human skills, okay, resilience, self-esteem, that sort of thing. Understanding and willingness of the change, and then personal learning and growth is the aim here. That's little pieces to it. We'll talk about those in detail. But I guess the key thing that I feel here, and where we're going with all of this, is that on the evolving path to success, change requires a deeper level of knowledge than does management. I can drive a car, okay? I can manage my household reasonably well. Could I change it? No way. I couldn't change the car. I couldn't redesign the car. I couldn't redesign the house. It takes a whole different level of knowledge, understanding inner relationships, to begin to design or change something than it does to just manage it. Okay? And so what we'll talk about for the rest of this time here is beginning to get a sense about the relationship between leadership, individual change, culture, and systems. And I'm just assuming through all of this that you all know, Dr. Deming's system of profound knowledge and so on. And this is we're blending the two together here. So the same thing is, although this is the organization, culture is held by individuals. And so what is the relationship between the individual and the organization? If we look at personal change, this is a useful diagram to me. Our interest here is in personal change. Change at three different levels. We're going to talk about change at the micro level, the organizational, and the macro level. Micro-level changes. I'm going to change where your desk is in the inside the organization. I'm going to change your hours. Okay? I'm going to change your commuting route. I'll change the person that you report to. Okay? All of those changes are micro-level changes, and if you look at their impact if we're looking at large-scale impact, they have very little impact in terms of anything that's important, those micro-level changes. In a sense, it's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, right? That they're rearranging deck chairs, micro-level changes, except, we can laugh at it that way and say that it could be equivalent to rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic when you're looking at their impact on the organization. But let's look at their impact on the individual. The impact on the individual is highest, okay, minimum, moderate, maximum level impact by these micro-level changes. Right? Let's hold on to that a minute. As compared to organizational changes. Organizational changes will be, maybe I'm going to enlarge the customer service department and I'm going to break it off from the technical department. That'll give us better customer focus, responsiveness, and so on. Well, that might have a medium level impact on the big things that we're trying to accomplish. But for an individual, you say, well, that's fine. I sit here and design, and it really doesn't mean much to me. And okay, maybe I worry about a little bit, where are my friends reporting, and where's the power base in the network that I've built up inside the organization. But the personal impact of organizational level changes is just moderate. And then if you look at the macro changes, the big changes that have the real high impact, okay, on an individual, those will have minimum impact on the individual. This might be, I'm concerned about world hunger, but what can I do about it? I'll just do my job and so on. I'm concerned about GM's balance sheet because that will affect my retirement, but I'm doing my very best. What can I do about it? Right? And so these might be changes in environmental protection laws, in something of that nature. But the key here is that it's real tempting to say, it's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic to work on micro-level changes. But what the paradox of change is really saying is that what you have to involve individuals in change, right? You have to help people move up that continuum. And although you want macro-level changes, they better have micro consequences. You've got to help as a leader and as a manager. Okay? You're going to have to actually anticipate what the micro-level changes are for people and manage those. So if we look at some lessons from that change diagram, there is no personal change without micro implications. You're not going to have someone transforming themselves, really deeply, personally investigating themselves, learning and growing, okay, by putting in new environmental impact laws, all right, or working on the large systems. And I think this is a modification off of what you have to. It's called continual improvement. Okay? No personal changes without micro implications. That's a fact of life. So you're working on your organization, and yet your people aren't working with you. There's nothing that has pulled them along with you. Yet if you make micro-level changes, so for example, let's talk about it. If you're talking about, I'm going to change this we're going to become more customer-focused as an organization, we need to trace that right down and through to what is the micro-level implications for each and every person, the people that work for you, because you're looking at individual and personal change. However, if you make large micro changes, a large micro change would be if your mother-in-law comes to live with you, as an example. Okay? That would be a micro-level change, has nothing to do with the larger scheme of things, but talk about the disruption and talk about personal impact. That's a huge one. That's perhaps the best example I can think about. And I have a wonderful mother-in-law, but still. Disruption in expectations is one of the things you're going to have to manage, is that if you're making those micro-level changes, there is going to be a sense of loss of control. And you're going to have to give people a way to influence what their future will be. Even if they can't dictate the outcomes, we need to give them some way to begin to influence what it will be so that they retain some sense of control about the changes that are going on. So micro implications must be understood, anticipated, and managed. And that, I don't think that in terms of leadership we've necessarily looked at that when we talk about transforming the organization. Transformation must be brought down to each and every individual. Okay? And micro-implications must be created if they're not there. That includes, and just a quick side note there, is that it doesn't have to be financial. Think about Maslow's hierarchy. All right? There's a whole different, it depends on where those people are inside that hierarchy, as an example. It would be, those are the implications, the micro-implications that are important to them that you need to anticipate and manage. And lastly, this piece about future shock is when the amount of change outweighs the ability of an individual to assimilate. So as a leader, when you're looking at personal change, inside this, just this one diagram and a little bit beyond it, we're looking at making sure we've got micro-implications, that we are understanding what those are for individuals, anticipating it, recognizing that they are going to go through some of the sense of loss of control, and how do you begin to give them a sense of control about the changes, and finally recognizing that people can only handle so much at one time, and that you're actually going to have to pace change. Future shock is when there's more going on than you can handle, and you kind of check out and you just say, I can't do that, or people start getting sick, or whatever else, and they become dysfunctional. That's the personal level of change. If we then look at, that's that one piece of it, then we have to say there's organizational culture as well. As individuals, we have our own beliefs, but formation of organizational culture, let me say, the people in this room, I have just elected you, nominated you all to be employees in my new organization. All right, I'm going to close the doors of this whole room, and you are now the employees of this new organization. This is your orientation session for your new job. You have no set of shared assumptions yet at all, or shared ideas about what it means to be successful at this organization. But our job is going to be to go out and help organizations learn about Dr. Deming's ideas and implement them. Okay? As we go through that part of developing how we're going to work, as we go through these things, the idea of what's our mission and what's our strategy, as we define for ourselves what's our goals going to be and how we are going to execute them. So the means are your work systems, this is out of order, your work systems, your managerial systems, okay, and your people systems. As we develop those things, what is it we're going to measure inside the organization, and so on. And as we go through internally, this is how we deal with the external environment. As we go through and determine internally what's going to be our common language, now that's not maybe conscious, but it's certainly part of what we do. What's our internal language that we're going to use? Now, we're already talking value in here. Most companies can't even handle the word value yet. Okay, that's a language that you begin to develop. It reflects what you believe is important, the language inside of an organization. Delineation of power. Who has what power? Okay. And then openness, intimacy, and friendship. The idea organizations go through this internal integration. It's okay, if you are in a different department, can I talk to you? I mean, what's the rules of the organization? Can we be friends if I'm a manager and I'm the boss and you're a worker? What's the rules for openness? What can I tell you? What can't I tell you? What's confidential information? All of those things. Rewards and punishment, and ideology and religion. But as we go through figuring out how we are going to, what is our mission and strategy, and how we're going to work. So dealing with our external group issues, dealing with the internal group issues, the direction is set by me, the leader. I'm going to give you the guidelines, the initial direction for where we're going to head and go. Then these guidelines, as this group, as we work for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and you successfully apply these guidelines day in and day out, if we're successful, the original direction that I've set for you will become our common culture. It will become what our boundaries and our beliefs about what it means to be successful. Like on that very first slide, theories and use for what it takes to be successful. That's what organizational culture is and how it's formed. It comes through shared experience, okay, repeatedly doing the same thing over and over and being successful at it, reinforces what the direction that the leader sets. Okay? So that's what they commonly call organizational culture. What leaders do to embed culture, things like what do they pay attention to, measure, and control. So as I come over and talk to you about your work, what do I ask you about? Am I asking you about, do you like your job? Or I'm asking you about how many widgets did you get out today? Am I asking you about what did you learn today and what's your group focusing on to improve? So the questions that I ask you begin to reinforce culture, how I react to critical events. When something goes wrong, do I look for a person to blame? Or do I say, let's see, is this a special cause or common cause? Do we need to improve the system? So those sorts of things. This is the role of the leader in embedding culture. How do I react? What do I role model myself as an individual? And criteria for rewards and status. You know, every organization has the people inside that this guy is a hero. These are the great things that he did. These are the people who have status, who the president turns to, who so-and-so turns to. And so I'm not talking about necessarily a reward as in here's a paycheck or an extra bonus, but where does status come from inside the organization? The leader determines those things, okay, by these things that they do. So if we're talking about culture, because what we're trying to do is understand these relationships. We're going to try and change this entire organization, transform it into a whole new organization out here that's based on a culture or paradigms beginning with Dr. Deming's ideas. Okay? So what I'm trying to do is understand if I'm going to become this whole new organization, I have to change individuals' ways of thinking and behaving and working. I have to change what the organization believes are the right things to do. I have to develop systems that codify that and make it easy for people to do the right thing, and then methods and practices that go along with it. So we've looked at the aspect of personal change. We can see how culture begins to form. Culture, again, comes through shared experience, using ideas, directions set out by the leader, and then reinforcement through successful application, and through that leader, again, personally reinforcing what's going on inside that organization. Okay. And that's fine and good for a new organization. If you look at impact on culture, and I realize I'm using a lot of new language for you, and I hope we're not on future shock in terms of being able to keep the language straight. But impact on organizational culture, what the organization believes is the right way to do business, the one that means that will make us successful. If you look at it through time, when I close the doors of this room and say, we are an organization and we're going forward, all of that culture is going to start based on myself, what the leader is, the direction I'm giving, and the initial reinforcement that's going on. So you have here the leader actually setting out and determining to a large extent what the culture is for an organization to begin with. But over time, the role of the leader diminishes, and the organizational system determines what's going to be measured, okay? How rewards and status are given out, and so on. So you might take, for example, General Motors. When it first started up, or any small division starts up, you have the leader who is defining what is culture. Systems are put in place to serve the leader. Eventually, people serve the system. Okay? So at some point in time, you have the systems, and this is that idea that you can become locked inside your organization, and unless you change these systems, okay, you'll not change culture. So there's a very important part for leadership up front, but at the back end, even strong leadership won't do it for you because the systems are reinforcing themselves. People are there to serve the systems. Originally, systems were there to make it easy to do the right thing. At the back end, okay, systems are there to make sure you're doing things right rather than doing the right thing. Okay. The last piece I want to pull together, because I'm just pulling little pieces of knowledge and I know they're coming from a fairly broad spectrum, to try to put together a whole model. These are the bases or pieces. This building knowledge, I couldn't have said it better than Tom Nolan had said it, and it's almost as if we had planned this ahead of time. He had said that you build what you're doing here, transformation, by inductive learning. We're using inductive learning. We're going to use trials, repeatedly try things out. Now, you don't have that slide either. And a series of second-order changes will begin to understand and determine the changes that have to be made. So what we're looking at here is building knowledge inside the organization of how your systems work. Okay? And if I put all of this and try to tie all of this together now, I guess I see this as the lessons, is that you have personal growth, helping an individual become more than just their position, helping them become centered inside themselves and go through that continuum, dependence, independence, interdependence. Building of knowledge through inductive trials, where you do small experiments and continually broaden the field of application. And then finally, culture formation. All of this happens within relatively small groups. Okay? So small groups working within their circle of influence. It takes time to go through and help people move up that personal or individual continuum. It takes time to develop knowledge, and it takes time to develop culture. So these are the different things we're working on. We're working on knowledge of your systems, because you have to now redesign, not just manage your organization, but you have to redesign your organization. You have to build knowledge of how your systems interact to create value for the customer. Right? You've got to help people through this personal growth process. We're talking about micro implications. If you can't translate it into micro implications, you're not going to get growth, development, and so on. And you also need that for culture formation. Okay? Culture comes through working as a group and through that learning that's going on. So developed over time, working in a circle of influence, paced micro implications. I'm not going to dump it all on you at once and pull the rug out from under you, but we're going to work through this in an evolutionary manner. And repeated successful application of these new ideas will build that new culture. The outgrowth of this will be new systems and methods. So if I take a small group inside your organization right now, and we're actually to pull them off for a special project, and we gave them education and training and a leader in there to help set direction, who has knowledge and can take that leadership role, they will develop a whole new culture of that group. They'll develop a new methods and systems for working together slowly through time as they build their knowledge. Okay? So that's the vehicle here. This is really that inductive learning through a series of second-order changes. Other lessons, I have to say, revolutionary change happens best in an evolutionary manner. That's what we're looking for. Transformation is revolutionary change, but it has to happen in an evolutionary manner. You can't flip the switch. Okay? Russia tried it in a revolutionary manner. That's a big paradigm shift. Russia's going, now talk about paradigm shift. That's a huge paradigm shift. And they're trying to go about it, or tried to go about it, in a revolutionary manner. It doesn't work. Okay? Leadership and culture, two sides of the same coin. You want to change the way your organization believes people should be working and what the rules for success are. We need to begin to cooperate. We need to build knowledge. We need to be focusing on processes and systems rather than punishing and rewarding individuals. All of those are beliefs, and those are a culture that requires a leader. You have to have a leader there helping to set that new direction. And you have to have an opportunity to exercise it, because it's only through repeated, successful application that you build culture. And leadership is not equal to management. Management is running today's system like driving your car. Okay, leadership here is setting out a new direction and enabling the organization to redesign itself. Okay, let's go to what to me is, in my mind, the model for, or an evolving model for, the transformation. Two pieces that I see in here. One is leadership for change, and the other is an infrastructure for change. We talked about these. You have to build the external knowledge of the organization. This is, in a sense, building subject matter knowledge, using Dr. Deming's ideas and philosophy to guide the building and development of subject matter knowledge, which is around your organization, and then acting on it to actually transform it. So you're going to have here the leader guiding this, building internal knowledge and this. You're going to have the leader providing the energy, the direction, the focus, philosophical focus to work with individuals and people. You can have the leader helping to build a willingness and an understanding. Why do we have to change? What does it have to do with me? How's it going to affect me? And then an understanding of it, and then a willingness. Okay, what are the micro implications? How are you going to help me maintain control through this, a sense of control? And also guiding the personal growth, personal learning and growth. A lot of role modeling and mentoring going on. Okay, and walking people through these stages. You have in your handout lots of detail on this stuff. The infrastructure for change is, you just can't, like Dr. Deming would say, by what method? You have to have an infrastructure, some method by which you're going to get this accomplished. It isn't just, by exhortation. It can't be just by exhortation. And so we have to have an infrastructure that is actually going to support all of these same activities. All of them. All right? And then let's look at the pieces for that. Under leadership, I'm looking at creating, directing, and managing change, both on the personal and the organizational level. So we're setting out direction. And under infrastructure, 3 different pieces, and we'll go into examples after this. First thing is develop a strategy and a path. And I use in my mind, in a sense, this example. It's if I were going to go and take a hill, if this were a war and I had to go take a hill, all right, I'd have to come up with some sort of strategy for doing that. Well, do I make a frontal attack going in this way and put all my forces in concentration right here? Is this the access point or the entry point that I could get in or through? Do I want to try to surround the hill, all right, and work up it from all different sides? What's my contingency plans? So in an organization, you've got this whole organization that you're going to have to tackle. You're going to have to take this organization, in a sense, and begin to change it and transform it. You need a strategy for doing that. Where are people going to let you in? Where is their pain, as Tom was telling us before, about where people are going to let you in and how you can begin to reach people in different ways. You need to find where are people going to let me in. One of the things that when I went with Dr. Deming and traveled with Dr. Deming, almost the first question he would ask a small group as he sat down with a small group, 10 to, say, 30 people, first thing he'd say is, tell me what's on your mind. I thought, why does he start that way? And you can just see him work through the process. He was always looking for, where are people going to let me in? What's the access point to this group of individuals? He's looking for what's their area of concern and interest, and where am I going to be able to get in and work with this group of people? So you'd say, where is the access point? I'd say for designers and engineers, boy, they're going to love these statistical methods. That's going to be an access point for them. Okay, with the marketing people, those that have to work in front of the customer and so on, what's the access point for them? You're going to find different access points throughout your organization. You want to create successes and let them build and grow energy along the way, because you as a leader can't sustain this change by yourself. You've got to develop energy inside the organization for it. Second thing is to create a space and forum for learning. You're going to have to carve out some space inside your organization where people can go through this process of learning about how how we work internally, what's the external world like, what's the value we create, what's our aim and mission, developing personally. They need a small, nurturing type of place where they feel safe to get away from I am my position and develop as individuals. And you need a place where you're going to develop a new culture. And that's where that energy is going to come from, the belief that this stuff works. So you create a space and a forum for learning. Space a little bit offline, not in the direct line pressure of the organization. And then the last piece, and to me this is the most difficult piece, or I've seen the most difficult for managers to think about and actually do, is to create a process for capturing knowledge and acting on it. So if you have what Tom Nolan was talking about, this inductive learning through a series of second-order changes, well, I've just had a couple of different groups out here, and they may be manufacturing groups, and they've made some changes. Now I'm, say, production manager. How do I capture that and utilize that knowledge to change the larger system? Because what you're trying to do here is take the learning from small changes, or for small trials, you might call them, and apply it to broader applications. You need to then go change your systems. Okay. Let's look at some pretty pictures. Oops. If I look at an organization and say the path of progress is from this end of the scale over to here somewhere. Progress is out this way. And if it's this straight a line, we're probably lucky. Okay? But this is the path to progress for an organization. The pieces that we've just talked about. Look at it, number one is leader's vision here. Leader's got to have a sense of where he's going to take this organization. We said the role of the leader was to provide the direction. Okay, with this. And so if we look at that and break it down, this is again, we were talking about creating, directing, and managing change. I'd say the external learning is understanding what's the customer's process like, where's the industry going, where's the trends, what are the philosophical changes that are going on, recognizing paradigm shifts as they begin to happen. So you have here external learning that is beginning to shape the leader's sense of where he's going to take his organization. He has here internal learning. Now the internal learning is, I've got to then take this and apply it to my organization. Again, if I'm going to not just drive or manage the organization as it is, but redesign it, I've got to understand how this organization acts as a system. It's a system, and I've got to understand the interrelationships between individuals, culture, my management systems, my work systems, and so on. So you have this internal learning. And then finally, this self-examination and personal growth. And to me, this is what the leader is doing as they are developing their vision for tomorrow. And again, their aim is to set the direction, the business and the industry, and philosophically, at that deeper level that we're talking about, which is what Dr. Deming is talking about. And to have that proactive drive to lead the organization. Now, each of these were drawn for a company that I was consulting with, and I won't say who the company is, but each one of these case studies applied to one of the facilities or divisions that I was working with. And I saw one manager doing exactly what I would say is this. External learning, flavor of the month. He'd say, well, here's a great idea, and here's a great idea, and here's a great idea. And he'd be tossing it back to his organization behind him. Here, do this. Here, do this. Here, do this. And not having, I'd say, number one, no internal learning, not understanding where the organization is, and not helping them. So the internal learning is, it's like if you were going to try and coach your kid in a sport or in math or whatever it is, you don't just say, oh, here's a great textbook, boom, throw it over your shoulder. Or here's a great video, boom, toss it over your shoulder. What you have to do is understand where they are, okay, where your child is, and say, what's the next thing to help them move along? And so this is a tough piece. Managers don't look inside their organization. They're looking outside, saying, these are great ideas, but they don't see their role as helping and nurturing to develop and pull the organization along behind them. And so they get this flavor of the month, driving their organization absolutely crazy and getting nowhere. So this is Plant A that I worked with. Let me give you one more. This is another organization that I worked with. Leader's Vision of Today, if you have this path, what you've got is today's vision, the leader's vision today, saying, hey, things are great. Like Dr. Deming, who was telling the story about Dr. Deming earlier on, when the company had 70% of the market share and saying, what's the crisis? Everything's just fine. And they become the ceiling for the organization's growth and development. You can't go past the leader. You can't get out in front of the leader. It just isn't going to happen. They won't allow it. So if the leader isn't personally learning and growing and so on, they become the ceiling to the transformation process. Right, so that's the first part of it, is the leader. The second part we talked about, an infrastructure. And in terms of infrastructure, let me say a process again for learning, a forum and a process for learning. And I drew this as PDSA, a group of people off on their own and beginning to develop a culture and understanding of how their organization works, personal growth and so on, evolving development of new methods and systems, etc. This is the change process here. And what your aim is with this, let me just quickly go through it because I'm running out of time. Personal growth, maintain control, I would say, rather than just restore control. Give them a sense of being able to influence what their own future will be. Develop a new culture. They're building knowledge and know-how, not just knowledge, but skills about how to work in a new way, and building energy for the transformation. If I look at it, though, is if you have this as another possibility, is you have the leader who's got great vision, okay, and he's created this infrastructure for learning inside, but yet there's no way, he's so focused outside, he's not created a path to connect the learning that's going on with what his vision is. And so you have people inside the organization, and they may be in teams, they may be doing great things, and the leader keeps coming and talking to them about, well, this is where we need to be in terms of goals and vision and direction. People are sitting there and they're scratching their heads and they're saying, well, I know how to do what we're doing in this group, but I haven't got a clue as to how to connect that to what you're talking about. Okay? There's got to be a way for the leader to capture what's the learning that's going on in here and change the systems accordingly. And so what we're looking for here is then to actually have the leveraging the knowledge that's built, where you take the methods and practices that are developed here and actually then change the larger systems. Let me give you one quick real example. This is one of the corporations I'm working for now. The company, and this is a sales and service example because so many of them have to go with people use manufacturing instead. This corporation has 3 different product lines that they make. And the product lines are actually made by different companies. So it's 3 different companies that we're talking about that work inside the United States. Though they all sell to the exact same customer. So if you're a customer, you're going to buy all 3 product lines from this one company through 3 different salespeople, okay, 3 different service people, 3 different designers, 3 different customer service, 3 different invoicing processes, 3 different everything, because these companies are totally separate from one another. And the customer is basically saying, this, I don't like this. This is a pain in the neck to me. You're taking too much of my time. This creates no value. Your company, your products are okay, but it's too difficult to do business with you. And so the company had originally thought about reorganizing. Well, let's leave the manufacturing facilities separate because they are 3 totally different products. And then reorganizing and creating a marketing organization, a field organization that would go across all 3 divisions. Right? That would have been just straight reorganization. And about a year or so ago, they floated that idea by, and fortunately it got shut down. Because I could have seen them reorganizing, and yet you would have the 3 salesmen in the field who right now compete with each other. They all have different numerical goals and targets. They all sell on a bonus system. Okay, they compete for time in front of the customer, and they would rather go and have dinner or lunch with a competitor than with one of their fellow salespeople from the same corporation, the same parent corporation. So what we've decided to do instead is actually, when I talked about a strategy for change and a path for change, they initially started out with a little pilot, one little tiny pilot group down in the southeastern part of the United States. They took all of the salespeople for 4 different customers, big customers. They took all the salespeople and service people and put them in this pilot group to service those 4 customers. They picked their best people, right? Those people that they felt were up-and-comers in the organization, who were somewhat ambitious, but just what they called their best. With this small pilot, they created a success. okay, in the customer's eyes and inside the organization's eyes. And what they did is they began to just build some energy. All of a sudden, management didn't have to sell this alone. They had the people inside that pilot, that successful pilot where culture was built, know-how was built, and they paced the micro implications. Okay? That pilot group then began to sell the rest of the organization. From there, they went to another level of change. They still didn't go and change. I mean, that could only be just one, right? Just a special cause. So, but this is where they are now, is they've actually got 3 more large cells going, which is an informal organization of the salespeople, service people, customer service, and so on, working with customers inside these regions. And they are getting these groups to start to work and develop know-how, right? The education and training gets done in the context of what's going on inside here. They begin to share knowledge amongst themselves. The thing is, they're beginning to change culture, know-how, what people do. They're getting a sense of the systems that have to change. They couldn't even plan their schedules because they couldn't communicate with one another. We had no common systems such as an audit system or message system, so they developed common systems for communicating. They're developing common customer databases, things that they didn't have before. Right, so this is part of the infrastructure. This is the space and forum. There's a strategy, which is a first pilot down here that started to work. They have then this secondary, much larger piece that is starting to work. This is the space of forum. And then the last important piece, the most important piece to this is actually, if you have your management group here, which is learning from these 3, and actually there's close sponsorship so that you have individuals, high-placed individuals working with these 3 to develop themselves as individuals. So you've got general managers who are nurturing each one of these so that they learn along the way too, because they have personal change and paradigm breaking that has to occur. And now what you have is, I'd say, you're allowing these people inside these cells to begin to shape their own future, maintain some control over it. And I think we will have, inside of maybe 2 years, a very successful change that is creating value for the customer, driving out the non-value added, looking at data to improve our systems rather than to judge and rank individuals, okay, to utilize Dr. Deming's principles and philosophy. And so it's a way to begin to get revolutionary change that I see as transformation in an evolutionary manner. And at the very end, say the last piece is we had individual, organizational change, and you can't forget societal change, which is actually educating your Wall Street, as an example, and others as well. Let me leave on the note then with this as a wrap-up, is that I'd say that if the increasing rate of change, and we never did talk about this, but I'd say that the one thing that is happening in the world today is that the rate of change is continually increasing. By the ability to communicate, we've shrunk time and shrunk distance. And it's my own personal view that the rate of change is increasing, and it's going to shorten the life cycle of our paradigms. That's my own personal guess and view. You might have had the craftsman paradigm useful for 1,000 years, and the Industrial Revolution one lasted, 100 and something. And now, what's the next one going to be, and how long will it last? So what we're looking at, I think transformation is beginning of an interdependent, lifelong process of personal and organizational learning and change. And that success will come not just from being able to manage the organization today, but creating a process, which is that infrastructure, just a very valid part of what the organization is about, to continually examine its assumptions and learn and change. And then finally, that to do this successfully requires new roles, and these have to be not add-ons, this has to be part of the job, is that your job as a manager is also as a leader, and to be continually reevaluating the direction and assessing direction and helping your organization move forward, and structures to support the work. By what method? Right? You want transformation by what method? You've got to have some method. And this is just a starting point. I'm not an organizational development person. I'm a statistician. And this is just a combination of my own learning and Dr. Nidabakaitis. And so far, it's useful to us. And I'd appreciate any thoughts and feedback that you have along the way. That's it. Thank you.